This podcast is brought to you by the Rasian Cajun Braden YouTube page. Check out videos and subscribe to my channel today. Also, in August through December of 2021, you can check out my meditation series on Vincennes University. And you could check it out as soon as it comes on after the VU Counseling Center approves it. It should be between August and December of 2021. Subscribe to Rasian Cajun Braden today. The following podcast may be disturbing to some viewers, especially to those who have been victims of rape and sexual assault. These stories have been secrets that I have kept for over 3 years, personal tales that I have shared throughout my time of encountering this man. And then to the 13-year-old girl who was a stab victim of this man and is now trying to live her best life, I pray for you every single day. I've graduated high school, I got a Core 40 diploma, and I promised I would do it just for you. You didn't know it, but I did. Viewer discretion is advised. In the summer of 2019, a vicious stabbing occurred at a music camp at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. The victim was a 13-year-old girl who met a boy named Mikey Ko the previous year. She almost was raped and sexually assaulted in a locker room at the IU Music Center and was stabbed multiple times in the thigh and stomach. As vicious as the crime was that Mikey committed, no one sounded the alarm until I came into the picture. I am Bear-Lents, and I was once a victim of bullying and insults from Mikey Ko. I was a victim of middle school shoving the problem away to make me feel worse. I bullied myself in 2016 and committed suicides multiple times until my final one in March of 2017. Since then, I have been stable, got help and the right treatment, and I graduated high school and will be an incoming sophomore at Vincennes and Indiana University. It took me a while to get into a stable discussion about this boy, but here I go as hard as it was. This is my story of encountering a rapist, a bully, and a classmate. This is time to be unchained. This podcast is produced by Bear-Lents. Special thanks to Amy and Bear-Lents. This podcast was written, directed, scripted, narrated, and produced by Bear-Lents. I want to say thank you to Mrs. Barb Stork, to my therapist Megan at Campania Academy, to Bloomington Meadows Hospital and Campania Academy in Bloomington High School South, for allowing me to share this story. Finally, I want to say thank you. So we're going to go back to a year of 2013.
Con los terroristas.
The Harlem Shake was popular for the entire month of February. Vine started with themes such as "Oh yeah" and "These nuts," and I began to start my 6th grade year at University Elementary School in Bloomington, Indiana. When I was at university, I had a delightful 5 years going into this point, and I remember going there from actually going to Franklin Elementary School and even KCARC Preschool at Vincennes. And the teacher I had at kindergarten, her name was Mrs. Burguy, and Mrs. Burguy she was a hard cookie. She was a hard cookie to deal with because she was scared of me when I was 5 years old. Not only that, but my mother and I had some issues at the time, considering the fact that I had autism and the fact that a man who we call 23, who is a baby daddy, I've accepted that term actually, our baby daddy was never there. He started sleeping with girls, and he really didn't care about us. He really didn't care about me and my mother had enough. She had enough with the school district. So on July 3rd of 2008, we moved to Bloomington. And around that time, this would be my 5th year at University Elementary School. At the time, my teacher was named Mrs. Holly Davis. She was decently cool. I actually heard back from her years ago and years later, and I remember she wanted to interview me for congratulating me on winning a scholarship that I had won, which that will come later. But anyways, 2013-14 was the start of my 6th grade year, my 5th year at the Monroe County Community School Corporation, and I was starting a brand new chapter almost as I made plans to go to Tri-North Middle School that next fall. And one of the things the teachers really told me back then was that I seemed like a very shy kid. I was a pretty shy kid. I was a quiet kid. But I came out under the bushes around 5th grade and I started dancing to Gangnam Style and being the life of the party, which at the time nobody ever thought was going to be a potential mental illness. But as this podcast suggests, I'm here to talk about Mikey Ko. The first time I met Mikey Ko was in late 2013, so late into our 6th grade year. Mikey was a kid nobody talked to as much. I remember he was shy, and I met him one time at recess. I didn't talk to him or anything. I was just there to see one of my friends at the time, who I'm going to call Clara V. Her real name was Clara Voskel. And actually, she's gone out of my life, so I'll just say Clara Voskel. And then Kira Kunzman was one of my other friends. Nina, Tyler, and this kid named Eddie who went to France years ago. And these were all my friends in elementary school. And at the time, I didn't know Mikey, didn't know him that well, never knew him barely any time when I was at the school. One of my biggest resources and biggest supports was actually the Voskels in them, and they even said that they saw signs in Mikey that something wasn't right in his youth. One thing about Mikey, as I'm going to move forward with the elementary school, he told me that in elementary school his parents were already abusive, and he didn't even talk about that. He didn't talk about how he was abused at home and how his parents really didn't care for him and like him. And that's the part that I'm not going to say will justify him later. But at University Elementary School, he was there, and I remember meeting him for the very first time. But he seemed very shy and quiet. I didn't know him that well. But the big thing was I knew kids like, as I said, Clara Voskel and Kira and Nina and Ada Lynch and Eddie. I knew these kids more than I did Mikey. But Mikey was very shy and we didn't actually talk to him. The last thing I learned about him before what high schools would call finals week, which would be in May of 2014 when I graduated. Already obsessed with Clara Voskel as my crush, I wanted to give her rings, 2 wedding rings, one for me and one for her. And I always remember trying to give her the rings. But around that time was when I started ending my obsession with Clara, and we were going to move on to different ways. But during finals week, Mikey was never heard from again. And what I had heard later was that he was suspended from university. And this was the beginning to when Mikey Ko became irritable and disrespectful. And it was later on, I mean, the kid was 12 years old. The kid was my age, 11, 12 years old, and he was already showing narcissistic qualities, which I will get into that later. At the same time, let's talk about me. In 2013 and 14, my grandmother was beginning to suffer from a wicked disease that was ravaging her brain. She was already just a pain to deal with at home, and she was becoming something that we did not expect out of her, because we didn't expect her to start losing her mind that soon. We didn't anticipate her to be the type of person that she was at the time, and we didn't anticipate her to ever have this symptom that we called Alzheimer's, which it was Alzheimer's. She was later diagnosed with it on February of 2015. It was February 29th, and I remember coming back home from school, and my mother was just in a silent daze, because 2 weeks before that, she was getting CTE scans, and they all came back negative. So my grandmother did not have a head injury, even from a car accident in 1984. She didn't have a wicked head injury, which was good. But her problem was that she had suffered from an undiagnosed eating disorder, and she was basically beginning to lose her mind, eat more, and she was filling up gas too much and writing checks and asking people if they knew how to go to Shoals. So at that time, for me, I was not only dealing with my grandmother having Alzheimer's, but my sister Brianna was also beginning to suffer through the first stages of autism, which is what I have. I was diagnosed at 4 years old, diagnosed at 3 years old. My sister was diagnosed at 4 years old. So she was beginning to have some autism symptoms, but at that time she was learning signing time, which the woman named Rachel, she visited Bloomington North one time, and she held a large event for us to attend. And Brianna actually loved this woman, and she was getting into her sippy cups, and at the time she would have been around 3 or 4 years old, so she was liking sippy cups and signing time, and she liked My Little Pony a little bit. The other traumatic thing that had happened in my life, besides Jane having Alzheimer's and Brianna having autism and dealing with that and then dealing with my own autism, was also a guy named Jason Spears, who came into our life for about a few weeks. He was about to divorce from his wife, and my mother was at a very, very dark state at the time. I mean, knowing her state, she had been abused at that time for about 30 years, narcissistic abuse, which I'm telling you this now because I'm not going to tell you later. I was just, my mother, she was dealing with narcissistic abuse, and she could never find herself. And I'm so glad now we're able to find ourselves, which the ending of the resolution will come later. But my mother was liking this guy named Jason Spears. I didn't even know why he was in our lives. He had previously gone to my mother's high school in Lagodi, and he moved from Virginia to Indiana, and started getting my mother into Tupac, Biggie, Notorious B.I.G., and then a little bit of Public Enemy. And my mother said that she used to wear little bandanas, and they ate on candy cigarettes. They tried to smoke candy cigarettes, and my mother said you had a red team and a blue team. You had a red, which means Crips, and then thugs were blue. And so they did handshakes. What's up, my wigga? I mean, what's up? I mean, these were just white kids from the suburbs, basically. And she got subjected to that, and this man she saw at that time, and she had not found herself. I didn't even see any normal in her at that time. There was no normal in the family. As my grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's, she became less grouchy, which allowed my mother to express herself more. But at that time, he came for about a month, and at that time, I was obsessing, of course, over Clara Voskuhl, as I mentioned with the rings, and I was just starting to like her. I loved her as a person, but I don't feel like it was affectionate love for Jason and my mother. And then he left for no reason. Then he left for no reason, just repeating the cycle that my mother had seen out of people for months and months now. Yeah, so previously my grandfather had died from leukemia. He had leukemia for 4 years between 2009 and 2012. So it was the hardest thing for us at that time, besides dealing with my grandmother. But after that, once she had said that Jim had died, that she had died, that was when we didn't even know at the time that she was getting worse, but we just knew that something wasn't right. Something really wasn't right. And not only that, my grandfather was one of my biggest inspirations at the time. Him and I watched Cardinals games on TV. We both saw Game 6 of the World Series at home, and we watched David Freese hit the homer that sent the Cardinals to the World Series. He was basically a father figure when I didn't really have a father figure. When the baby daddies were coming around, I was able to be around my grandfather, and he really, really helped me, really, really cured me, and he made sure that I had that father figure. It was really respectful in life. He taught me a lot of stuff about success, and he taught me how to fulfill my dreams. But the strangest thing was, they didn't even teach my mother this. They never taught her any of this stuff, which was the part that really confused me. But they did me, and that was one of the reasons why I still think now we question him as a person. But at that time, my mother had been really, really frustrated, and now going back into 2000, looking back on 2013, I say to myself, what could I have done to make situations better? Ladies and gentlemen, this was the very first part of the UnChained documentary and podcast at the UnChained podcast. I want to thank you for listening. This episode was really short. It just described some of my times between 2012 and 13. I did not have enough evidence and proof and enough support to back up my claims when it ever came down to Mikey, because at that time he was suspended from school and I did not hear him again until around the end of 7th grade year, which I'll talk about in the next episode. So thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry this episode was short. I promise it will be longer, but I just didn't have Mikey at that time. He was just short-lived, and I didn't even know him that well at the time. So this was the beginning. This was from 2011 to 2013 to 2015. So coming up next on the next episode of the UnChained podcast, a story from Mikey Ko's victim, we will talk about more extensively about middle school and about my time at Tri North.